"You were a failed president," Trump snapped, his words cutting through the silence. "You weren't even born here. You never should have been president." What Obama said next made Trump regret every word. The night was heavy with anticipation. Bright studio lights cast a sharp glow over a polished table at the center of the stage. Everything about the setup screamed importance, like history itself was about to be written in front of millions. The air felt tense, electric, as though everyone in the room understood they weren't just about to watch another debate. They were about to witness a collision. Two men, two very different visions for America, seated across from each other under the unblinking eye of the camera. On the left, Barack Obama, calm, composed, focused. His hands rested lightly on the table, but his posture told a different story. He carried weight, the kind of weight that doesn't come from titles or suits, but from responsibility. Millions of people were counting on him to be their voice, and he knew it. Across from him sat Donald Trump, a man who never entered a room quietly. His very presence demanded attention. His confidence was unmistakable. He leaned back slightly in his chair, eyes darting around the studio as if daring anyone to challenge his authority. He hadn't spoken yet, but you could feel it. The storm was waiting. The moderator cleared his throat, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, steady, almost too steady for the moment. "Tonight," he began, "we're focusing on the real issues Americans face every single day. The rising cost of living, broken health care, and the question of justice for all." Those words hung in the air heavy. They weren't just policy topics. They were struggles woven into the daily lives of millions. Parents stretching paychecks, seniors rationing medicine, children living in communities where fairness felt out of reach. Everyone in the studio knew this wasn't going to be just another debate. This was personal. The moderator turned to Obama first, and instantly the energy in the room shifted. The audience fell silent. Cameras zoomed in, catching the slight lean forward in his chair. The focus in his eyes, Obama's voice broke the silence. Calm, steady, measured. "Across this country," he said, "there are parents working 2, sometimes 3 jobs, and still struggling to put food on the table. There are seniors who spent their whole lives working hard, only to find themselves unable to afford the medicine they need. People aren't afraid of hard work. They're afraid of what happens when hard work still isn't enough." The words weren't shouted. They weren't dressed up with slogans. They were real, simple, human. The camera panned to the audience. Some nodded slowly. Others leaned forward, drawn in by the weight of what he was saying. The silence wasn't empty, it was filled with recognition. Everyone knew someone living that reality. Obama shifted, his tone growing sharper. No one should ever have to choose between taking their child to the doctor and keeping the lights on at home. But that's what's happening across America. Every time leaders delay, families suffer. And in too many cases, people die. The room grew heavier. You could hear a pin drop. Even the moderator, whose job was to guide the conversation, looked shaken by the intensity of the silence. Obama paused, letting the weight of his words settle before moving to his final point. His eyes scanned the room, steady but fierce. "When we talk about justice, we aren't just talking about courtrooms. We're talking about fairness at work, at school, in our neighborhoods. People are tired of feeling like the system isn't built for them. They want leaders who fight for ordinary Americans, not just for the powerful." His voice grew firmer, resolute. "That's why we're here tonight. Not to trade insults, not to toss around empty slogans, but to talk about how we actually fix these problems." And in that moment, the entire studio seemed to soften. Even the cameras framed him differently, casting him not as a politician at a podium, but as a voice of reason in a sea of noise. The audience appeared moved, some nodding, others sitting perfectly still as if frozen by the gravity of the words. For a rare moment in politics, it felt like the room was united. Like maybe, just maybe, real solutions could be discussed tonight, but then, a sound. Small at first, the shuffle of a microphone. Across the table, Donald Trump leaned forward. He hadn't said much all night, but everyone in the studio and everyone watching at home knew what that meant. When Trump spoke, he dominated the room. He knew how to flip the energy with just a few words. The tension shifted instantly. The calm Obama had built now hung in the balance. The audience felt it. The cameras sensed it. That moment before impact when you know something is about to happen, but you don't know which way it will go. And then, Trump cleared his throat. The storm was about to begin. The studio was frozen. Barack Obama's words still lingered in the air, heavy and unshakable. The audience sat in silence, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for what would come next. But across the table, Donald Trump stirred. He leaned forward, his movements deliberate, his hand brushing against the microphone. The faint scrape of it echoed louder than it should have. The sound was enough to pull every eye in the room toward him. The energy shifted instantly. Trump sat up straighter, his face half smirk, half glare. He was waiting, calculating. For a few seconds he said nothing. Just silence. But it wasn't the silence of hesitation. It was the silence of someone who knew exactly what he was about to do. He let it stretch, let it hang in the air until the anticipation became almost unbearable. The audience leaned in. The moderator shuffled his papers nervously, sensing what was coming. Obama didn't flinch. His expression stayed calm, though his eyes locked firmly on the man across from him. And then, Trump's voice cut through the silence. "You were a failed president," he said, his tone sharp, almost mocking. "You created a mess in the past, and now I'm the one cleaning it up." The words hit the air like a slap. Gasps rippled across the studio. Some people in the crowd leaned back in their seats as though the sting of the words reached them too. The moderator froze, his pen hovering above his notepad. Trump wasn't smiling now. His smirk faded into something harder, something colder. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. His voice grew stronger, more forceful. "You left this country weaker. You made promises you never kept. You built a legacy on words, not action. And I'm the one who had to come in and pick up the pieces." The audience shifted. Some gasped again. Others shook their heads. The tension in the room was electric, almost unbearable. Obama still didn't move. His composure seemed unshaken, but the fire in his eyes flickered, subtle but unmistakable. Trump saw it and he pushed harder. His words came faster now, sharper, like a man throwing punches in a boxing match. "And let's be honest," Trump said, his tone dropping low, almost taunting. "You weren't even born in the United States. You shouldn't have been president at all." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the silence of respect this time. It was the silence of disbelief. Every head in the audience turned. Some people's mouths hung open. A wave of whispers spread across the studio, like a current running through the crowd. The moderator's eyes widened, his hand frozen over his stack of questions. Even the cameraman hesitated, unsure of where to focus. Trump leaned back in his chair, satisfied. He expected applause. He expected the crowd to rally behind him, to reward his attack with laughter, maybe even cheers. But none came. Instead, the weight of his words filled the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Obama sat perfectly still, his face calm, unreadable. He didn't break eye contact. He didn't fidget. He didn't blink. He just watched. But that calmness, it was almost more powerful than a counterpunch. The crowd felt it. The audience at home felt it too. Something was brewing. Something dangerous. Trump, sensing the silence wasn't going the way he wanted, leaned forward again. His voice rose louder, harsher. "I built businesses. I created jobs. I made this country strong again, and you? You just stood there with speeches while America suffered. You failed the people, Barack, admit it. You failed them." Every word struck like a hammer against the stillness. The tension was unbearable now. People in the audience sat forward in their seats, gripping their armrests. The camera zoomed tighter on both men, capturing every flicker of expression, every breath. But Obama stayed silent. The longer he stayed quiet, the more powerful the moment became. It was as though he was letting Trump swing wildly, burn himself out, dig his own hole. The audience held its breath. The stage no longer felt like a debate. It felt like a battlefield, a showdown. And though Trump's words filled the air, it was Obama's silence that commanded the room. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it, and when it came, it wouldn't just be a response, it would be a reckoning. The room was charged. Trump's words still echoed. Failed president. Not born in the United States. Like thunder rumbling after a lightning strike. The energy in the studio wasn't just tense anymore. It was volatile, like the whole place was sitting on the edge of eruption. Trump leaned forward again, feeding off the silence, mistaking it for weakness. His hands tapped the table. His finger pointed straight at Obama as though he was a prosecutor on trial, not a debater sharing a stage. You talk about justice, about fairness, Trump sneered. But you don't understand America like I do. I built businesses. I made jobs. I made this country strong again, and you just made it weak. His words landed like rapid-fire blows. Each sentence sharper than the last, each one meant to corner his opponent, to make him flinch, to force him into anger. The audience shifted in their seats. Some whispered. Some shook their heads. Others leaned forward, unable to look away. They could feel it. Trump wasn't debating anymore. He was attacking. This wasn't about policies. This was personal, but across the table, Obama sat perfectly still. He didn't flinch. He didn't interrupt. He didn't even raise an eyebrow. He just watched. His eyes were locked on Trump, not with rage, but with something colder. A kind of steady, unshaken calm that only made the contrast sharper. The cameras caught it, the storm raging on one side of the table, and on the other, a quiet stillness. Trump grew louder, filling the silence with his voice. His words spilled out faster, like a man who couldn't stop himself. You left this country divided. You failed to keep promises. You stood in this very position and told the American people you'd bring hope and change. But what did you deliver? Nothing but broken promises. The moderator glanced nervously between them, his lips parting as if to intervene. But he stopped himself. He knew better. This wasn't his debate anymore. Trump slammed his hand lightly against the table, trying to break Obama's calm. Say something, he snapped, his voice booming through the studio. Defend yourself. Because you can't. You failed this country, Barack. The audience gasped. The tension thickened, and still, Obama said nothing. Instead, he leaned back slightly in his chair, folding his hands together. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost unnerving. He didn't rush. He didn't meet Trump's volume. He just breathed. The cameras zoomed in closer. Viewers at home could see it. The faintest flicker in Obama's eyes. That quiet fire. That glimmer that told everyone watching that this silence wasn't weakness. It was preparation. Trump mistook it. He smirked again, certain he was in control. He spread his arms wide as if claiming the entire stage as his own. Look at him, Trump said, his voice dripping with arrogance. He's got nothing. Nothing to say. Because deep down he knows I'm right. He failed. And I'm the one fixing his mess. The crowd buzzed again, torn between shock and disbelief. The silence that had once given Obama power now seemed to tilt the room toward Trump, at least on the surface. But underneath, something else was happening. Every second Obama stayed quiet, the anticipation grew heavier. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was alive. It was breathing. It was waiting, and the audience could feel it. Their eyes darted between Trump's furious energy and Obama's unwavering calm. It was like watching a storm rage against an immovable mountain. One was loud, wild, destructive. The other was silent, steady, unshaken. The moderator shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't dare break the moment. Even the camera operators seemed locked in, holding their shots longer than usual, capturing every detail of the showdown. Trump's voice rose again. You created division. You destroyed trust. And now you sit there acting like you've got answers. You don't. You never did. Admit it, you were a disaster. His words echoed hard. His face flushed red. His movements became sharper, more aggressive. But Obama still didn't move. He simply leaned forward now, just slightly, his eyes fixed on Trump, steady, unshaken. And with that one subtle movement, the entire energy of the studio shifted. The audience straightened in their seats. They knew what was coming. They could feel it. The silence wasn't passive anymore, it was dangerous. It was the calm before the storm. Obama's breath was slow, controlled. His hands stayed folded. His voice hadn't yet been heard. But everyone watching, everyone in the studio, everyone at home, knew it was coming. Trump thought he had control. He thought the silence was his victory, but the audience could see the truth. That silence was a fuse, and it was about to ignite. The silence was unbearable. Seconds felt like minutes. The audience leaned forward, waiting, almost begging for Obama to finally speak. Trump had been hammering him for what felt like forever, each insult sharper, each jab louder. And yet, Obama had stayed still, quiet, watchful. But then, slowly, he moved. Obama leaned forward in his chair, folding his hands on the table. His voice, when it came, wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was calm, controlled, steady, and that made it cut even deeper. "Donald," Obama said softly, his eyes locked on Trump. "You like to shout, you like to throw insults, but let's get one thing straight." The room held its breath. "You were a failed president." The words landed like a thunderclap. The crowd gasped. Even Trump blinked. Momentarily thrown off balance, Obama didn't stop. His tone sharpened, though his voice never rose. "You created chaos, you weakened alliances, you divided Americans. You left behind a mess, and now you stand here pretending to be the one cleaning it up? You? Donald, you've never cleaned up a mess in your life. You've only made them bigger." Trump's smirk faded. His jaw tightened. But Obama's eyes didn't leave him. "And let's not forget," Obama added, his voice steady as stone, "you once claimed I wasn't even born in this country. You tried to tell the world I didn't belong here, that I had no right to lead the nation I love." The studio fell into absolute silence. You could hear the hum of the lights, the shuffle of a chair in the back row. Nothing else. Obama's gaze burned now, sharp and unwavering. "But here's the truth. I served this country with dignity. I worked to bring people together even when it wasn't easy, and you spent years trying to tear me down with lies." Trump shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His usual quick retorts didn't come. For once, he stayed quiet. Obama leaned in closer, his words slower now, deliberate, every syllable like a hammer striking. "I don't need to shout. I don't need to insult, because facts speak louder than your noise. And the fact is, you don't scare me. You never have." The audience erupted with gasps and murmurs. Some clapped before quickly stopping, realizing the weight of the moment. Trump opened his mouth to interrupt, but Obama raised his hand slightly. Not enough to be disrespectful, just enough to signal I'm not finished, and he wasn't. "You call yourself a builder," Obama said, his tone razor sharp now, "but everything you touch, you break. Businesses, partnerships, trust, even the very office you once held. You didn't build America up, you chipped away at it piece by piece." Trump's face flushed red. He shifted in his seat, tugging at his tie. The camera zoomed in, capturing every detail, every crack in his armor. And then, Obama struck the final blow. He tilted his head slightly, his voice lowering so the audience had to lean in, straining to catch every word. "Tell me something, Donald," he said. "When was the last time your own wife looked at you with respect?" The words hit harder than any insult before. They weren't just political. They were personal. They cut deeper than a debate stage should ever allow. The audience gasped audibly, some even covering their mouths. The shock was palpable. The tension snapped like a rope pulled too tight. Trump froze. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. For once, he had no comeback. No quick insult. No deflection. Just silence. Obama leaned back in his chair, his hands still folded, his expression calm. Almost too calm. He didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He just sat there, as though he hadn't just dismantled his opponent in front of millions. The silence that followed was louder than Trump's shouting had ever been. The moderator's pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the desk, breaking the stillness. The cameras panned across the audience, capturing their stunned expressions. And Trump, he shifted again, his face tight, his hand gripping the table as if holding on to something solid. His eyes darted around the room, searching for support that wasn't there. Obama had landed the punch. The kind of punch that didn't just sting in the moment, it lingered. It echoed, and Trump knew it. The audience knew it. The world watching from their screens knew it too. This wasn't just a debate anymore. This was a moment that would never be forgotten, and Trump, for all his bravado, for all his noise, had been silenced. The air in the studio was thick, heavy. It felt as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Barack Obama's words still lingered like smoke after a fire. "When was the last time your own wife looked at you with respect?" The crowd had gasped, but then, nothing. Silence, a silence so sharp it almost hurt. The kind of silence where no one dares to move, no one dares to breathe too loudly. Trump sat frozen in his chair, his face flushed a deep shade of red, his jaw clenched tight. His eyes darted toward the moderator, then to the audience, then back at Obama, as if searching desperately for a rope, a lifeline, anything to pull him out of the wreckage, but there was none. For the first time all night, Donald Trump didn't have words. And that silence, his silence, spoke louder than any speech. The camera zoomed in on his face, catching every flicker of emotion, anger, shock, disbelief. Millions watching at home saw it too. The man who always had a comeback, always had a jab ready, sat there with nothing. Obama didn't gloat. He didn't lean back with a grin or throw his arms up in victory. No. He stayed calm, composed. His hands folded in front of him, his expression steady. That restraint, that quiet confidence was the finishing blow. The moderator finally cleared his throat, his voice trembling slightly as he tried to break the unbearable tension. Thank you, gentlemen. Let's, move on to the next question. But there was no moving on. Not really. Everyone in that room knew it. The debate wasn't over, but the fight was finished. The audience had seen the knockout and nothing else would matter after this. Trump shifted in his seat, muttering under his breath. His hand gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. He looked like a man who wanted to storm out but didn't know how to do it without making it worse, and then he snapped. Trump leaned toward the microphone, his voice raised, sharp, almost desperate. That was low. That was disrespectful. You think you can talk about my family? You think you can get away with that? But the damage was done. His words didn't land the way he wanted. They didn't feel powerful, they felt weak, defensive. The audience didn't cheer. They didn't applaud. They just sat there, watching, knowing they had witnessed something unforgettable. Obama didn't even respond. He didn't need to. He simply glanced at Trump once more, then turned his attention back to the moderator as if Trump's outburst wasn't even worth his time. That dismissal, that quiet ignoring, was a victory all on its own. The moderator stumbled through the remaining questions, but the spark was gone. The debate had lost its rhythm, because no one could shake what had just happened. Every new topic, every new answer was overshadowed by that one exchange. The cameras kept cutting back to Trump, his face still tight, his eyes still burning. And every time they cut to Obama, he looked calm, in control, unshaken. The contrast was undeniable. When the debate finally wrapped up, the moderator thanked both men, but even his voice carried the weight of what had happened. He knew, everyone knew, the candidate stood. Trump rose quickly, his movements sharp, jerky. He avoided Obama's gaze, his lips pressed tight. He muttered something to his aides as he walked off stage. His shoulders tense, his stride fast. He didn't look back. Obama stood slower, more deliberate. He adjusted his jacket, nodded politely to the moderator, and gave the audience a small wave. He didn't need to say a word. His presence alone was enough. The audience erupted, not in cheers, not in chants, but in the buzz of whispers, the kind of whispers that fill a room when people know they've just seen history. Some clapped. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others just stared wide-eyed, still processing what had unfolded. Backstage, Trump's team scrambled, whispering urgently, trying to spin what had just happened. But deep down they knew. This wasn't a moment that could be spun. It was raw. It was real. And it had cut too deep. Obama, meanwhile, walked calmly off the stage, his expression unchanged. Not proud, not smug, just steady, like a man who didn't need to prove anything, like a man who had said what needed to be said, and nothing more. The cameras followed him as he disappeared into the hallway, his figure fading from view. The audience was left with the image burned into their minds, one man walking away calm and collected, the other left rattled, silenced, exposed. That night would be remembered not for policy debates or campaign promises, but for the moment, one man's words cut through another's noise. For the moment, Donald Trump, master of the stage, master of the comeback, was left with nothing. And for the moment, Barack Obama proved that sometimes the most powerful voice is the calm one.